So this right here, hanging on this frame, is one of our principles, the fourth principle. It was hanging in Osiris. And last week I saw it laying on one of the tables here in the fellowship hall. And I thought, wow, how fortuitous. Is that a sign? I'm going to be preaching on the fourth principle next Sunday. So as Patrick was helping me affix this to the framework, I said that to him and he said, oh, that's been down for a long time, since early last summer. The Unitarian Universalist 7 principles were adopted at General Assembly in 1984. The 7 principles were created by committee, a fact which makes it rather amazing that although I think they're a little wordy, they are coherent and they're highly relevant, not only to our living tradition, like who we are historically, and how what we've become over time, but also it articulates well the values that guide us in our contemporary life. And finally, it's most surprising to find that if we view the 7 principles in a certain way, we discover a theology expressed in them. Now, I'm going to take a moment here and say that while it's maybe a little, I don't know, there's a tension between me talking about the 7 principles today and the fact that we voted at General Assembly to possibly change the way that these values are presented. I want to say that these values are not going to go away. They are going, if they change, they're going to be those values will remain the same. They're just going to be presented a little bit differently. In terms of what I know, there are many people in our UU world, ministers and lay people alike, and especially the Smiths, who know a lot about what's going on in that regard. I am not the expert, but I think it's important that we understand at least. We don't have to give up our 7 principles. We can keep those banners in the hall for as long as we want, because that's what congregational polity is all about, right? And we need to understand where we've been, right, as we go forward. So this is such a different way of looking at these 7 principles, kind of theologically and institutional. I couldn't resist. So here we go. Yes, there is a theology which underlies our 7 principles. My colleague, Douglas Taylor, presented this one time at a meeting of ministers in upstate New York that I attended, and it was very compelling. Theology is a Greek term meaning God talk, but as a discipline, especially an academic one, theology encompasses many concepts which refer to our lived experiences as human beings and what we believe to be true as a result. For example, cosmology is part of a systematic theology, and that means the whole of things, the universe. And then there's another ology, ecclesiology, which means how we're together religiously. And then there's epistemology, how we know what is true, and eschatology, the end of things, ultimacy, end goal, a turnover of some type. Now, even though we might be more familiar with these terms or concepts, if at all, as they apply to maybe Christianity, in as they apply to Unitarian Universalist theology, it's as much about what it means to be human in pondering the nature of the universe as it is about God or not God. Because we embrace pluralism here. We embrace many theologies, many personal beliefs and viewpoints. So actually, can I have you roll that back? Because I don't want it to be a distraction while I'm talking. Not quite ready for that yet. So I thought it would be important to address too, that the 7 principles were intended to be value statements rather than creed statements. They're aspirational. They're ideals to be lived into. The preamble to the principles states, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote," and then the 7 principles follow. So every congregation who's a member of the Unitarian Universalist Association or in relationship with other UU congregations, we all promise that we are going to affirm these principles and to promote them, to try to live into them. Now, it doesn't say that these are creed, or it doesn't say we believe. Now, we have a little red card that is printed that we have, and we put it in our newcomer packets and our new member packets, and it's what Unitarian Universalists believe. And John kindly put one in each hymnal if you happen to pick up one. But there are 10 statements by Minister David O. Rankin, and these cards were published in 1995. And he stated 10 beliefs that clearly get their inspiration from the 7 principles. Of course, there's 10 of these statements and 7 principles, but I'm not going to read all of them for you because you're not going to be able to remember what I'm saying, but an example would be, the first one is, we believe in the freedom of religious expression. And so, as David O. Rankin puts these forth, I fear that we might get confused about what belief is and what creed is, and then what these value statements are, the 7 principles. So I think that a few of what Rankin wrote of the 10 might be called beliefs, but the remainder of them are really ideals that we believe in. And I'll talk a little bit more later about personal belief and coming to a belief in by personal experience. But he says, for example, believing in the democratic process. We believe in the democratic process. Well, the democratic process, I don't think, is something that you can believe or not believe. It's a form of governance, right? But I'll explain later about how we might come to believe that it might be the choice for us in terms of our governance in our congregations and in the wider world. So the creed statements of Christianity and Islam, they derive from scripture and from ecclesiastical or clerical authority. They're doctrinal, they're interpretations, and they imply no choice. You believe them word for word or you don't. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you don't, you're out. But as a Unitarian Universalist, if I argue that this statement that we believe in the authority of reason and conscience, that's one of Rankin's statements. We believe in authority of reason and conscience. I might argue that to To have authority for the human authority of reason and conscience might get us into trouble at times. There are lots of bad people in the world who can reason things and have a particular conscience. So I can challenge that belief, right? I can say, David O. Rankin, that belief might get us in trouble. I'm not going to get excommunicated. In 1894, the American Unitarian Association declared itself a non-creedal denomination, and that didn't change when the Universalists joined us in 1961. And I'm not saying that Rankin's little red card isn't helpful. I wouldn't have given it to you if I didn't think so. Our religion can be diffuse and confusing, and these are like guideposts or compass points. They keep us on the path of our Unitarian Universalist religion and how to live into it. But at the same time, I think Unitarian Universalists should be careful with putting a royal we and believe in the same sentence, simply because of our pluralistic nature. So let's get back now to the theological scaffolding that this next image, I hope, will be explanatory or will help explain this theology. So we have an arch, and in architecture, the keystone is that one up top that's kind of triangular, and it holds all of the other stones around it in place. It maintains the arch. So if we look at this and we start at the bottom, at our foundation, we see that on one side we have principle number 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and on the other side we recognize that we are part of the interdependent web of all existence. We're a part of that. So this is what we would refer to as our cosmology, our place in the universe. First, as individuals, and that we deserve a place in the universe, and the seventh, on the other side, that we have a place in that larger web of life from within this biosphere, then outward to our place in the solar system, the galaxy, and so on. And we can take that back all the way to our cosmic origin story, which for many of us is the beginning of what we know started with a Big Bang. Now, we do know that we are made of the stuff of stars, right? The elements of our bodies are the same as suns and planets and gases and so on and so forth in the universe. That's our cosmology. So just above our foundational cosmology, that part of our theology, our beginnings, and our place in what we know to be existence, we have principles 2 and 6. Now, that is in the image here, justice, equity, compassion, and human relations. This is in our congregations and in our living. And then on the other side, we take that concept of justice, equity, and liberty for all out into the wider world. We want to see, what we want to be with each other, we want in the wider world. Now, you may have heard me say before that if we live into the 7 principles, if we could do that flawlessly, we might have a beloved community. So in other words, not a utopia, because this is We're living on planet Earth where it's hazardous to live. We still will suffer disease, sickness, illness, but we don't cause each other any grief. This is an idea that came from Martin Luther King Jr. He emphasized living, that the ultimate goal for him was living in beloved community. It's an end goal. Now, in Christianity, the end goal is called eschatology. It's kind of an apocalyptic thing where reality gets completely turned over, and we're no longer have our human experience. That's a heaven come to earth. Our beloved community is earth becomes heaven. So don't let that word eschatology scare you. Our end goal, our ultimate, is beloved community. And then principles 3 and 5, acceptance of one another and encouraging spiritual growth in our congregations. And then number 5, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in the larger society. This is how we are together. This describes how we are to be together. Theologically, this is ecclesiology. The root word from ancient Greek is ecclesia, I believe it's pronounced, and it means assembly, together. So we're called by Principle 3 to assemble democratically within our congregations, to support one another in our spiritual paths. And in larger circles, we see that the right of individual conscience and personal agency in a democratically run society, we envision this leading to viable assemblies in a civic sense, in a shared world sense. So if we follow this arc from 1 to 7, we start with the individual and we progress to assemblies in which we enjoy just and right relations, and then in ever-widening circles of community until we find ourselves in the context of the universal. So at the top of the arch is the 4th principle, which holds it all together. And of course, it is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So theologically, this means, well, the word that applies is epistemology, but it means, how do we know what is true? Well, there are components in deriving what's true and meaningful in our lives. And these same components are also elements of other religions and how they figure out what to believe. How do we know the truth? So the first is direct experience. How do we know what to be true? And that we learn through our senses. And then our knowledge that can be gained is kind of like already out there. Math is an example of something that exists outside of our experience that we can attain that knowledge. Rationality, what we know to be true by a reasoning, logic, and analysis. And then tradition, what do we know to be true from our forebears in our institutions and our culture? So finally, there is belief. What do we know to be true from the culmination of all of these other ways of knowing? Belief here though, is not a creed, but a point of view, an approximation of the truth, what is likely to be true, provable, but might be unproven. So as an example, Rankin's statement, "We believe in the inherent dignity and worth of each human being." Well, I don't think that the inherent dignity and worth of each human being can be proven as true or factual. But based on our direct experience, our reason, knowledge, and being steeped in our faith tradition, most Unitarian Universalists believe this to be true. And it seems to most of us a truer assumption than being born in a depraved state. So our belief here doesn't come from on high. It's not given to us. It's not catechetical. It is attained in a sense. And most of you are probably here because you had that sense already. You came in here and what Unitarian Universalism offers already resonated with you. Now, the beauty of being a non-creedal religion is that belief among us does not have to be fully shared or commonly understood. Our viewpoints, our beliefs about the nature of our being, about God, not God, the cosmos, our religion, our prayer, spiritual practice, these beliefs and practices among us can be as individual and different from one another as our fingerprints. So we must follow our individual conscience in seeking our own truths. But to do it together, right? Alone, individually together, to do that, we have to have the glue of covenant, of that promise that we are going to accompany each other in our individual paths. And so that's the reason Principle 3 calls us to accept one another in our path and to encourage spiritual growth. Now that is not sharing a creed, a deity, or a sacred text, right? Not all agreeing on the same concept of creation, the cosmos, God, sacred text. We don't share the same language around those things. Not having those things be uniform has a downside, because it means that we have to be responsible for our own search, our own journey for truth and meaning. And say, for example, if that search gets disrupted by, say, a pandemic, it's hard to get back on track, right? If for any number of reasons we become apathetic toward an earnest study of what it is to be Unitarian Universalists, we risk falling away from it. And if we stop challenging ourselves to deepen our spirituality, we tend to stay on the surface of things, of our lived experience. And when we no longer hear the still small voice that speaks to us from a place of authenticity, we become fragmented within ourselves. If we fall into passive congregational life, we tend to be present but not engaged, inspired but not transformed. And without a meaningful grounding in our UU values and practice, we lose focus. And our connection to each other loses its strength, and our commitment to the congregation wanes, and the keystone begins to crumble. And that threatens the rest of the structure, the congregation, our UU faith, and its impact on the world. So while it might seem that that beloved community might be what's most important to Unitarian Universalists, consider that it's not, that it is the fourth principle that is the most important to us. Because it calls us, once again, to be responsible for that to ourselves. What makes that search most precious is the freedom that we have to seek truth and meaning. And for me, the key word in that fourth principle is responsible. We're responsible for our own search, solidifying our own UU identity, but also we must be supportive of each other's journeys. And perhaps some of us don't realize it, but we are thirsting for meaning in our lives. Not only you here now, but out there. So I just want to say that, give you one example of, well, okay, so how do we go about this search for truth and meaning? And the fact that you're thirsting for that meaning, the Soul Matters, the small group ministry, has been resurrected in the congregation. It has come back, and we have 4 groups that are taking part in what's called Soul Matters, which is small group ministry. So also, in the 10 belief statements of David Rankin, he says, our search for truth never ends. In our faith tradition, we can't claim to finally have arrived in our search, having figured it all out. We are called to humble ourselves, actually, before an unfathomable and vast cosmos. We are called to humble ourselves, living on a planet that we've yet to figure out how to live peaceably and with care upon. We must humble ourselves to the fact that we are a religious institution that is young and in the throes of growing pains, and that sometimes it's hard to make a pathway or create a platform for our search for truth and meaning. And finally, I hope that we realize our unused capacity for deep self-knowledge, for living more fully into our principles, and for a better understanding of the covenantal nature of our religion, that promise that we'll walk together in living out our 7 principles, and understand and practice the 4th principle and all its implications. In this way, we remain strong. If you're strong, we're strong. If you have a strong sense of where you're going or what is true to you, we all are, even if it's slightly different from the person sitting next to you. We have the potential to grow in ourselves and grow our faith. So I leave you with David Rankin's words about we believe in an unending search for truth and meaning. He says, if the mind and heart are truly free and open, the revelations that appear to the human spirit are infinitely numerous, eternally fruitful, and wondrously exciting. So may we all find inspiration, revelation, fruitful searches, and may they be wonderfully exciting. May it be so for all of us. Thank you.